Rina Grushev died on March 12, 1988, in a district hospital in a small Far Eastern town from acute leukemia at the age of 18 years old. A post-mortem examination confirmed the diagnosis made by the attending physicians. The death committee, headed by a professor invited from the regional center, recognized the actions of the doctors to save Rina as correct. Rina was buried on March 16th in a cemetery located on the largest hill, from where the entire city is clearly visible on a clear day. The Grushevs had arrived in the Far East a year ago and were almost unknown in the city, and yet Rina's death shook the city, and various rumors began to spread about AIDS, drugs, and of course, unhappy love. By the end of the month, a clearly unhealthy atmosphere had developed in the city around Rina's death. The local press and radio added fuel to the fire by simultaneously broadcasting the topic, "Is everything alright in our healthcare system?" where Rina Grushev's death was mentioned as an example of obvious trouble. The Grushevs found themselves in the center of attention. Only the extraordinary courage and endurance of these people, silently experiencing their grief, held back the people's emotions that were ready to burst out. Rina's names appeared on the walls of houses in English. 15-year-old girls began to wear their hair just like Rina's and dye their hair bright red as well. Rina's death stirred people up until the beginning of June, much more than the latest newspaper issue, the lack of sugar, washing powder, soap, etc. But summer came, it became hot in the city, and Rina was forgotten. On July 10th, Rina's father, Albert Vladimirovich Forte, a plumber, came to the city prosecutor and put a statement on the table asking for a forensic medical examination to be carried out in connection with the death of his daughter, because, as was written in the statement, Rina did not die of leukemia, but was strangled. Leaving the statement without further explanation, Grushev left, saying only that, in case of refusal, he would contact the regional prosecutor and, if necessary, the republic prosecutor. The prosecutor was wary of making a decision on his own. He called the secretary of the city committee. An hour later, an emergency commission consisting of the secretary of the city committee, the prosecutor, the deputy chairman of the city executive committee, the chief of police, and the chief physician of the central district hospital met in the latter's office. The decision was made unanimously to order a forensic medical examination, inviting an expert from the regional bureau, as well as the professor who headed the lethal commission. They decided to carry out the exhumation on July 12th. The secretary himself called Grushev, talked to him for a long time on the phone, said that his request will be satisfied, and made him promise that, in the interest of the investigation, the Grushevs will remain silent. On July 12th, the hill was cordoned off by a police squad. The grave was dug up, the coffin was taken out and transported to the morgue, a small building with a padlocked door. The autopsy was scheduled for July 13th. All of this was done quickly and quietly. The city did not know anything. An examination report and conclusion were drawn up. The death of Rina Grushev, born in 1970, was caused by acute leukemia. No signs of strangulation were found. At 10 o'clock, Rina was buried again. The Grushevs were invited to the prosecutor's office and the expert's conclusion was read. The mother cried quietly. Albert Vladimirovich listened in silence. To the prosecutor's question, is he satisfied with the results of the examination? He answered yes, and promised that the investigative bodies will not be bothered anymore, and so they parted ways. On the evening of July 20th, a resident of the city of Karina, Maria Petrovna, took the garbage out into the yard. As she later said, she felt dizzy, stood in the entryway for about 5 minutes, then went up to the garbage can, lifted the lid and, oh my God, in the can, on a pile of garbage, lay a naked girl, like a big doll. Her body was covered in blue spots, and in her hands, she was clutching an icon. Maria Petrovna dropped the bucket, screamed, and ran. On the landing, she was stopped by a neighboring boy, Victor, 16, a student at a vocational school. Having difficulty understanding what had frightened Granny Maria, he ran out into the yard. In the garbage can, as he later said, there was no naked girl or doll. The doctor called by the neighbors to Maria Petrovna found no disorders in her except for fear, but just in case, he ordered her to lie in bed for 2 days and take a sedative. The next day, Victor told his friends that his neighbor had gone crazy. She saw a naked girl in a garbage bin. Vasily Petrovich, a bus driver, was passing by and asked, "Was that girl pretty?" Victor, without thinking, answered, "Like Rina Grushev." On July 22nd, Victor came home from work. He was doing an internship at a cement plant, tired and exhausted. It was about 6 p.m. He plopped down on the couch in the hallway without changing and fell asleep right away. He does not know how long he slept. He woke up laughing loudly. Overcoming the leaden heaviness in his body, he opened his eyes. They were laughing in a large room, the door to which was wide open. A draft was blowing through the room. The wind was fluttering the tulle on the window. Vitya sat up. In the opening of the balcony door, behind the swing tulle, stood a tall, slender girl. Her disheveled hair was the same color as the setting sun. She was laughing. "Are you Rina Grushev?" Vitya asked. "And you are an alcoholic, the son of an alcoholic," the girl laughed in response. "And a week ago, you sniffed gasoline in the basement. You're Rina. I saw you at the disco, but you're dead." The laughter stopped. "Dead, dead," the girl repeated quietly, backing up to the balcony. "Dead," Vitya heard once more before she disappeared. Vitya did not tell anyone about this vision until he had to. He stopped drinking and became thoughtful. His attitude towards his parents changed. He became gentle, attentive, caring, and even tender. Since then, he never slept during the day. At night, he slept with the light on. The day after meeting the guys from who he heard about the naked girl in the trash bin, Vasily Petrovich was driving his bus along the route, airport, center, seaport. Stopping at Strelkova and announcing the stop, he suddenly said to himself, "Rina Grushev lives 100 meters from here." Having said this, he got scared and looked around the cabin. Several passengers were dozing in their seats. The heat was overwhelming. The bus was almost empty. What the hell, thought Vasily Petrovich. Thank God no one heard. Well, okay. All sorts of things are creeping into my head, but who pulled my tongue? Vasily Petrovich sighed heavily. Time for vacation. His thoughts moved to the lake, where he saw himself with a fishing rod in the reeds, and he immediately forgot about his oversight forever. Olya Shushina, 16, was no different from her peers. She moved up to the 10th grade, and in July, she did her school internship at a bakery. She got up for work at 7 o'clock, got out of bed with difficulty, wandered into the bathroom like a sleepwalker, and only woke up there. So it was today, July 23rd. Combing her thick black hair and yawning in front of the mirror, she was suddenly taken aback. A beautiful girl with fiery red hair was looking at her from the mirror. Olya began to frantically rub her eyes. The girl in the mirror repeated her movements. She lowered her hands. The girl did the same at the same time. Olya stuck out her tongue. The reflection did the same. The tongue of the reflection was long, narrow, dry, with a bitten tip. Olya put her tongue away, closed her mouth, and smiled. The reflection copied her. Olya does not remember how long she stood in front of the mirror. She woke up from her obsession when she heard a nervous knock on the door and her mother's voice. "Hurry up, Olya, you're late for work." "Goodbye, friend," Olya said to her reflection and left the bathroom. Again, she told no one about her vision at first and was almost happy because she felt something new, significant, real in herself. The day passed by as usual. By evening, Olya was already the same Olya, tired and dissatisfied with everything in the world. She twitched in the disco, smoked a cigarette for fun, and returned home by 1 o'clock. In the morning, she got up as always at 7 o'clock, wandered into the bathroom, and was not at all surprised when she again saw her reflection in the mirror. So, Olya began to live in two faces. One, the outer one, everyone around knew. The other, the inner one, only she saw, and even then only in the mornings when she combed her hair. And Olya guarded the feeling of something new in herself, like a small fragile spout, gaining strength with each passing day. Mom also noticed some changes in Oya. Her gait became more confident and feminine, her gestures smoother, her voice deeper and softer. A teenager turns into a woman, she sighed understandingly. The years fly by quickly when children grow up. One day, returning home from a disco, Oya heard someone running after her and shouting, "Rina, wait, Rina." She stopped, looked back, and saw an unfamiliar man. He also stopped dead in his tracks, looking at her point blank. Then, taking off and wiping his glasses, he said, "Sorry, I made a mistake." This meeting made Oya feel uneasy. She immediately remembered Rina Grushev, who had recently died and whom she had never seen. She remembered the rumors that had been circulating about her death. Oya was scared. She wanted to see what Rina looked like, but how could she do that? It was awkward to go to the Grushevs, and under what pretext? By the way, thought Oya, where is Rina buried? She bit her lip. Probably on the hill where they bury the young and newcomers, and Oya decided to go to the cemetery. The next day, having gotten up as usual and talked to her reflection, Oya, instead of going to work, went to the hill. The day was starting to be hot. The heat was just rising from the ground, still spreading as a warm thick fog. The cicadas were buzzing loudly. The smell of grass made her head spin. Her soul felt light and clean. Oya found Rina's grave quickly, and from a distance she saw a huge portrait instead of a monument. She walked up to it and froze. It was her reflection. Rina's face in the photograph was stern and very focused, not like in the bathroom mirror. Her dress was modest, with a large false collar and long sleeves. The slanting rays of the rising sun fell on the glass, and Oya saw her real reflection in it. How different we are, she thought sadly. Then she picked a few daisies growing next to the grave and put them next to Rina's portrait. She noticed that the grave was freshly dug. Even the clay had not dried yet. It's strange, Oya thought. Rina was buried in the spring, but she did not want to think about anything else. So, without thoughts, she sat by the grave for 10 to 15 minutes, then got up and slowly, without looking back, went home. So what? We'll live together, Rina, she said in a whisper, closing the gate of the cemetery fence. The town where Rina Grushev died had no landmarks, although it was several hundred years old. Tourists rarely visited it. In the summer, once a month, they would sail on a large motor ship from the upper reaches of the river. Right at the pier, they would usually split into two groups. One would remain in town. The other would transfer to small, slow-moving boats and be carried away to Lesnoye Ozero, where a tourist center had recently been built. Vladimir Nikolaevich Prokudin, a former Far Easterner who lived now in Moscow, always traveled alone. He chose, of course, Lesnoye Ozero. Having barely settled himself comfortably on the stern of the boat, Vladimir saw a beautiful girl sitting opposite him, stretching out her slender legs. Vladimir had not seen her among the tourists who had arrived on the boat. You can't help but notice someone like her in a capital crowd, he thought. What amazingly fiery hair. What artistic carelessness in her hairdo. A chiseled high forehead, a thin Greek nose with quivering nostrils, huge blue eyes. He stared at the girl. Only her lips are terrible, as if with traces of dried blood, and they themselves are bloodless, dead like a vampire. Vladimir shuddered. It was hot, all of 30 degrees, and the girl was dressed in a long green skirt and a sleeveless blouse of the same color, but with a straight collar, right up to the neck. On her thin, graceful neck was a massive necklace of red Indian stones. Could this be the mistress of the Copper Mountain? Vladimir thought with admiration. The girl, noticing that he was examining her, looked Vladimir straight in the eyes. He felt embarrassed by his unceremoniousness, and he tried to say something, but the girl forestalled him with, "Together then, to Lesnoye." Then, smiling with her eyes alone, she added, "It's nice there, the air is clean there." They began to talk, as casual fellow travelers might talk, sailing to Lesnoye Lake. Vladimir felt at ease with the girl. He had the feeling that, talking to her, he was talking to himself. So quickly and freely did she penetrate into his soul, into its most secret corners. This feeling was pleasant, but it was not calm. Something was bothering him. There was some discomfort. The feelings were divided. When the boat moored to the pier of Lesnoye Ozero, Vladimir understood what was bothering him. She was cold. Not a pleasant coolness, but cold. Having realized this, he immediately found a suitable explanation. The girl is smart and has a strict disposition, although this did not fit into the image born from communicating with her. Having landed on the shore of the forest lake, they immediately broke away from the group. Vladimir led her to a hill with the cheerful name of Duncan Pup. At the foot of the hill, there was a fairly wide and very deep stream with dark transparent water, which was tasty and aromatic from the infusion of herbs and black currants dropped by the coastal bushes. Having reached the stream, Vladimir invited her to take off her shoes and dip her feet in it. He unbuttoned his shirt and began to wipe himself, squinting either from pleasure or from the rays of the sun breaking through the leaves and needles. She sat down on a huge stone and began to swing her bare legs. There was silence all around. Finally, Vladimir said, "It's a pity that you have such a blouse and such a heavy necklace. The water is truly delightful." At these words, her face darkened and became somehow dry. She stood up abruptly and said with undisguised irritation, "So, we're going to the hill?" Vladimir was confused by such a turn of phrase. Then, without buttoning his shirt, he took her by the hand and began to climb the hill. Her palm was cold as ice. They climbed slowly, putting aside the branches of the bushes that grew thickly on the slope of the hill. They had not even taken 10 steps when she screamed. Vladimir saw that the necklace had broken, and she, barely managing to catch the crumbling stones, were pressing them tightly to her neck. Vladimir stretched out his hands to her. She turned abruptly and ran down. He was confused and, not understanding anything, shouted, "Where are you going? Where are you going? Wait!" But the girl had already disappeared into the bushes. After standing like that for a few minutes, Vladimir began to slowly descend toward the stream where she had just been, on a hazel branch, to which the necklace had gotten caught, hung a long piece of crumpled bandage, soaked in long dried blood. Vladimir never saw her ever again. For several nights in a row, residents of the outskirts saw from their windows a bright flame of a fire on the top of the hill where the cemetery was located. Naturally, the GOVD found out about this, but, taught by the bitter experience of their own helplessness in the face of incomprehensible phenomena of extreme human anxiety, they decided to act cautiously. At night, Police Captain, Criminal Investigation Officer Spirin PA, armed with a Japanese movie camera with infrared lighting, hiding behind gravestones and crosses, hid not far from Rena Grushev's grave. Yes, the fire was burning right on her grave. 14 people were sitting quietly on the ground around the fire, slowly swaying with their hands outstretched towards the flame. Lips were moving, but words were not heard. Are they saying a prayer or something? The officer thought, and twirled his huge mustache for some reason. He did not immediately notice that the hands of the circle members, as he managed to christen them, were bloody. Bloodstains were later clearly visible when viewing the cemetery newsreel obtained by Police Captain P.A. Spirin. The detective was very scared. His hand reached for his pistol holster, but then he remembered with annoyance that he was forbidden to take a weapon. A thought flashed through his mind. Where is the victim? He took a risk and, leaving the camera, crawled closer to the fire. Now, lying behind the neighboring tombstone, he could clearly see the faces of the circle members. Despite the reflections of the flames, they were striking in their deathly whiteness. He made out the words being spoken. "Rena, take our blood. Get up, Rena. The time has come. Let it be so." Swaying in time with the words, the circle members clenched and unclenched their fists, and blood flowed from the cut veins along their outstretched arms to the ground. Most of the circle members were teenagers of 15 to 16 years old, but among them there were a young man and a girl of about 20. Spirin recognized 2 of them immediately. Vitka Matyev, a student at a vocational school familiar from the police juvenile room, and Olya Shushina, his neighbor. And how did she end up here? The police captain was genuinely surprised. He decided to follow it to the end. How would it all end? Without interfering and without revealing himself. They bled for about half an hour. Then the movements of bodies and fists stopped. Spirin felt uneasy when, turning to face Rina's portrait, the circle members howled pitifully, like young wolves. Finally, they fell silent. Having amicably broken up into pairs and turned to face each other, they took bandages out of their pockets and began to bandage their wounded hands. At the end of the procedure, everyone stood up, put out the fire, lined up in a chain, and slowly left the cemetery. It was a strange sight. A dark chain of slowly moving people with their heads down, barely dragging their feet under the clear moon and bright stars, between moonlit crosses and tombstones. At the city police department, when viewing the film shot by Spirin, they quickly identified 12 people. They were all local, students from schools, vocational schools, technical schools, 2 workers. Only 2, a guy about 22 years old and a girl, could not be identified. The next night, a 5-man task force was in ambush. The fire usually flared up for about an hour. This time, even at 3 o'clock, no one showed up at Rina Grushev's grave. They realized that the ambush had failed. On September 4th, a group of citizens approached the city executive committee asking to register them as a Far Eastern committee. The charter and program of this committee were presented by its leader, Boris Yakolev. Despite the fact that Boris was just beginning his career as a city narcologist, he was well known, a family man, a public figure. In a private conversation with city executive committee employees, he, among other things, said, "Our main task is to block the routes to the Far East for the Rina Grushevs." That same day, the circle members showed up at the city Komsomol committee, all 12 of them. They declared that they had formed an alternative Komsomol and called it the Rina Grushev Front. The charter and program of the front were presented by the leader of the circle members, a student at the Road Technical School, Yuri Novokreshenov. The city committee instructor, receiving the guys, noted that, despite the heat, they were all wearing shirts and blouses with long sleeves. Granny Maria felt deprived. After all, after she saw the naked girl in the trash bin, she had more than enough attention from people. Her interview on this matter was published in the factory newspaper. A radio correspondent came and recorded her story on a tape recorder, promised to let her know when the program went on the air, but he disappeared somewhere, and she did not remember his last name. Yes, until recently, everyone respected her. It was a shame how quickly they forgot about her. But it was even more offensive that people flocked to the neighboring yard, to her old rival, that fool Katka. This is how Ekaterina Alexandrova Mishkova, a pensioner, friend rival, and the same age as Granny Maria, lured people. On July 25th, she accidentally found herself on Lenin Square, where she saw a crowd approaching like a black cloud. She quickly realized what was going on and darted into the entrance of the city committee, ran past a dumbfounded policeman, went up to the top 6th floor, and began to observe the events taking place on the square. Anyone who wanted could learn the following from Ekaterina Alexandrovna. She saw with her own eyes how Rina Grushev ran ahead of the crowd. Her hair was like flames on her head. She was dressed in a green dress, unbuttoned on her bare chest. Rina waved her hand, drawing the crowd along with her, and shouted in an unearthly voice, "I give you freedom, people. Take it." It was this vision that made her eyes darken, and she lost consciousness. She woke up in the hospital, but she disagrees with the doctors that she suffered a concussion. Old and young, civilian and servicemen, listen to silly Katka, and Granny Maria feels envious and heavy-hearted. The people have become completely corrupted, she says, and Rina has become their passion. And she was not wearing green, but naked and covered in bruises. Silly Katka could not see it in her blindness. 20 years ago, terrible things happened in the city too. One villain, having decided to take revenge on the Soviet government for something, began to strangle the children of big bosses. He strangled the son of the city committee secretary, the daughter of the city executive committee chairman, the niece of the police chief. He would lie in wait, track them down, and strangle them. He strangled them with whatever he could find: a stocking, a towel, a pillow. In court, he said, for revenge. The city lived in horror for a month, but they believed that it would not escape the righteous people's court. The trial was held on Lenin Square, right under the open sky, and there were no riots in the city. Different times, different people. Professor Shevalev's speech at the Soviet-American Psychiatrist Symposium held in Moscow in the spring of 1989 attracted everyone's attention. He spoke about mental epidemics, phenomena of mass madness, well known since ancient times. He gave a detailed historical background on the most significant and well-known mental epidemics that engulf cities, countries, even entire continents. Thebes, 10th, 8th centuries BC. The ancient Greek tyrants at the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. The biblical Sodom and Gomorrah. The witch trials in the Middle Ages that engulfed England and European countries. The plague riot of 1771 in Moscow. The potato riot in the Urals. Spy mania in the 1930s, etc. Gennady Ivanovich emphasized that the causes of mental epidemics are always subjective, but it would be a mistake to limit them only to socio-economic conditions. It is time to take into account that space can wage undeclared meteorological wars with us, causing, in particular, mental epidemics. He revealed some mechanisms of madness and talked about the ways of influencing them and about the clinic of mental epidemics. Sigmund Freud, a famous Austrian psychotherapist, revealed the unconscious in our soul and studied the ways of influencing it. He was one of the first to seriously talk about the psychopathology of everyday life, manifested in slips of the tongues, typos, slips of the tongue. This is his merit. But mental epidemics are a total manifestation of other I in a person: ghost, dead man, zombie. In mental epidemics, all three mechanisms of someone else's I work. People, gathering in crowds, turn into these werewolves, ghosts, dead men, zombies, for themselves and those around them. Yes, ghosts, dead men, zombies, but there are more dead men.